And I think we see glimpses that such technology was available in the distant past. The mainstream media has told us that Saddam Hussein believed himself the reincarnated Nebuchadnezzar. So it might be worth going and taking a look at King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, find out what he was up to. According to the Bible, he built a structure out of gold. It's been translated as the fiery furnace, but obviously it was more than just a furnace because people would go in, come out. Okay, but he never got it to work quite right. Plus, some of his people got sick and died. So he was concerned about this. Was he creating an energy field? Apparently so. So he goes down to Palestine. He gets the three Hebrew priests, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, brings them to Babylon and says, I want you to make this work. And they said, well, you're not our king, and you don't believe in our God, and we're not going to work for you. So he said, well, I'm going to put you in this structure, and said, you make it work or it's going to kill you. Well, interestingly enough, they didn't just walk in or they didn't just push them in. First, they donned their raiments and their cloaks and their hats. Well, what's that got to do with anything? Or was it that they were putting on anti-radiation suits? But anyway, they put the three of them in there, and King Nebuchadnezzar, he didn't want to go anywhere near it, so he says, are they in there? And one of his minions said, yes, O king. In fact, there's four of them in there. Four? He said, who's the fourth? And they said, well, it's the Son of God. Obviously made an impression on them. Well, who was that? We don't know, because there's never any more reporting of what happened after that, other than the fact that Nebuchadnezzar was so impressed with the performance of the three priests that he put them in charge of the whole Babylon and the whole thing. So obviously they had created an energy field, perhaps a wormhole, and somebody had come through one way or another. So there's a tantalizing glimpse that they had access to this exotic technology as late as Nebuchadnezzar, and that Saddam Hussein might have been going for that himself. So that leads us to the war in Iraq. What was that all about? Well, we were told that Saddam Hussein was about to have a nuclear bomb and launch it at us within 6 weeks, but that proved to be untrue. We were told he had weapons of mass destruction, but that proved to be untrue. We were told, well, we're going to go get his oil, but that was untrue because we ended up getting less than we did before we attacked Iraq. And then finally it was down to, well, we're trying to bring them freedom and democracy. Well, you might recall that when Blackwater, the mercenary private contracting team company, killed about 40 people by spraying bullets in a public square, that the government of Iraq, who, let's face it, was our little government, the one we had placed in charge, said, hey, that's too much. We want them out of there. And the United States told them, no, I'm sorry, we have contracts with them. They have to stay. How's that for freedom and democracy? All right, so what was it all about? Well, it was about the attack on Baghdad in April of 2003. Unlike normal military strategy, which is you take an objective, you attack your objective, you consolidate your winnings, pacify the countryside, move on to your next objective, we made a beeline straight for Baghdad. And what happened in Baghdad? The looting of the Iraqi National Museum. Now, what was this all about? I have the news clippings from mainstream media in my files that showed in 1999, 2000, German and French archaeological teams were making amazing new discoveries in Iraq. They even think they found the tomb of Gilgamesh, who up until recently was thought to be a mythical character. But now they begin to realize that there really was such a person. Just as now we're beginning to realize that there's stories of the Anunnaki and these people who visited from another world and could travel around by flight, that these very well may have been based on reality also. So where would they have been bringing the newly found discoveries from the ancient Sumerian cities of Uruk and Ur? They would have brought it to the Iraqi National Museum. More than 700,000 pieces were taken from the museum by a mob, probably hired as cover for a operation that went in there. Museum directors around the world had gotten the Pentagon to pledge that they would protect the Iraqi National Museum because it was the repository of human history. And yet, when the mob showed up, U.S. servicemen were ordered to withdraw, and the mob was allowed to ransack the museum. But Colonel Matthew Bogdanos, deputy director of the Joint Interagency Coordination Group, investigated the looting of the Iraqi museum, and he wrote, "The basement is what we've been calling an inside job. I'll say it forever like a mantra. It is inconceivable to me the basement was breached and items stolen without an intimate knowledge of the museum. From there, about 10,000 pieces were taken. We've only recovered about 650 approximately." So in other words, this was the mob, and the looting was cover for a operation to send operatives in there. They found glass cutters that are not commercially available in Iraq. Some of the guards were suspiciously missing or called in sick. Whoever the thieves were had keys to some of the exhibits and to the basement, and they passed up very expensive-looking fakes and went for the stuff in the basement.
No, they knew what
This
they were
was
doing.
an operation to gain what they thought may have been the ancient ET technology. So who got this ancient ET technology? Well, let's take a review of what we've just seen. First, this knowledge was passed through the mystery schools of Egypt and Greece, and then, of course, was deposited and stayed in Solomon's temple. When then it was picked up by the Knights Templars, who then created the stonemasons, and then which became Freemasonry, the Rosicrucians, the alchemists, and then the Illuminized Freemasons. These were the Freemasonry in Europe that had gotten infiltrated by the Bavarian Illuminati. Illuminized Freemasons then created the Round Tables, funded by Cecil Rhodes, whose whole idea was to set up a secret society to try to regain North America for the British Empire. Then the Nazis took over, got Solomon's treasure, picked up a lot of the secrets through their magic psychic program. This was then passed to the U.S. military-industrial complex, which is now at the head. The head corporate leaders and banking leaders are usually members of the secret societies like Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, which was an offshoot of the Council on Foreign Relations, and of course the Bilderbergers, which are some of the top industrialists, corporate leaders, media moguls, banking officials who meet once a year, and so secret they don't even have a name. They're just called the Bilderbergers because they were first discovered by the public meeting at a Bilderberg hotel in Holland. To the people who claim that there's a small group of people trying to control the world, is that just conspiracy theory, or is there some facts to back that up? I would point you to a 2011 study by the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology. They studied 43,000 multinational corporations, and they found out that these 43,000 corporations are actually controlled by only 1,318 companies.
147.
Most of these with interlocking directorships and ownerships, and these 1,300 companies are in turn controlled by 147 firms with interlocking control, and that these 147 firms control more than 60% of global revenues. That's an incredible concentration of power. And of these 147 firms, actually the majority of those are controlled by about 20 major banks. So when they say the banks are running the world, there is good evidence to show that this is true. And how do they do that? They do that from little-known agencies such as the Exchange Stabilization Fund. It was created in 1934 at the height of the Depression, and it is a little-known office of the U.S. Treasury, which controls the New York Federal Reserve Bank, which in turn is the lead bank for the Federal Reserve System, the 12 banks of the Federal Reserve System. They also have handled the black budget for the CIA, which brings in billions of dollars unaccounted for. They also created the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, which has come under criticism for trying to control and buy up the third world countries. The Exchange Stabilization Fund is one of these little interlocking systems where the bankers control everything, and it's been involved in virtually every scandal in American history since its creation in 1934, and that includes the claims of CIA drug smuggling, Iran-Contra, and even the JFK assassination. Another little-known control mechanism of the monetary system is the Financial Stability Board. This originally was the Financial Stability Committee of the Bank for International Settlements, which was created to handle war reparations after World War I, but soon became taken over by the German Nazis. and was a Nazi bank. And during the World War II, this was the bank where everybody kept their money and to stay above the fight. In 2006, President Obama signed on to the G20 agreement that agreed to let the Financial Stability Committee become the Financial Stability Board, which oversees our economy. It dictates policy to the Fed, to the Security and Exchange Commission, and other policy groups. And so this, by the stroke of his pen, President Obama has now put our entire financial system into the hands of the international bankers, as if they didn't have a large enough stake in it through the Federal Reserve System. So with the Bilderbergers and with these international agencies that are now controlling our economy, this is where the power to control and manipulate the media and big business comes in by a small handful of people. And these people can trace their heritage and their knowledge back to these ancient sky gods. The Rothschild banking dynasty is acknowledged as probably one of the top organizers of the financial pyramid of power in the world today. And they don't laugh at the idea of ancient astronauts. In fact, in the 20s, they named one of their children Nimrod because they claim that they are the descendants of the Sumerian god king Nimrod. We also find that Sulla, the famous Roman general, founded a college in Rome dedicated to the Egyptian goddess Isis. Julius Caesar claimed to be his father was Aeneas, the father of Romulus and Remus, and said to be a hybrid between a human and a non-human, the goddess Venus, known as Hathor to the Egyptians and Asherah to the Sumerians. And so again, we see the connection back through the Greeks and Egyptians and to the Sumerian deities, because it's all in the bloodlines. These people think that they should be in charge of the world, and they can tell everybody else how to live, and they claim that right because they say they can trace their bloodlines back to the original gods of antiquity.